The young maid saw the Duke's child left alone, until she whispered, "Come, dance with me." The gaslight flickered against the ornate walls of Thornfield Hall, casting long shadows across the marble floor where the remnants of the evening's grandeur still lingered. The season's most anticipated ball had drawn to its conclusion, leaving behind only scattered flower petals and the fading notes of the orchestra's final waltz. In the west corner, partially hidden behind a column of Italian marble, sat a small figure in white lace, forgotten as thoroughly as yesterday's gossip. Mira Elowen moved silently through the emptying ballroom, her grey servant's dress blending with the shadows. The silver tray in her hands collected abandoned champagne flutes, a task befitting her station. Yet something drew her gaze repeatedly to that lonely corner, where the Duke of Halewood's daughter sat perfectly still, like a porcelain doll placed upon a shelf, and then forgotten. "The child is peculiar," whispered Mrs. Harron, the head housekeeper, appearing beside Mira with the silent efficiency that had terrorized lesser maids. "His Grace prefers she remain undisturbed. The physicians claim excitement disturbs her constitution." Mira nodded respectfully, though her heart whispered otherwise. For 3 weeks since her employment at Thornfield, she had observed the child, Lady Seren, they called her, always apart, always watching, always alone. The girl's blue eyes followed the dancers with such longing that it pierced Mira's heart like a dressmaker's finest needle. "Best finish quickly," Mrs. Harron added, her voice brittle as winter ice. "His Grace will be retiring shortly." The mention of the Duke sent a flicker of apprehension through Mira's frame. Duke Alistair Thalen was a figure of austere authority, his countenance forever shadowed by grief, since the passing of his Duchess 3 years prior. The servants whispered that he had not truly looked at his daughter since that day, as though the sight of her pained him beyond endurance. As the last guests departed in a rustle of silk and murmured farewells, Mira noticed Lady Seren still had not moved. In her small hands, the child clutched a wooden spinning top, its surface carved with delicate whorls that caught the dying light. Her tiny fingers traced the patterns with mechanical precision, over and over, as though seeking an answer in their spirals. "Lady Seren," called the governess from across the room, her voice thin with exhaustion. "Come now, it is well past your hour." The child did not respond. Her eyes remained fixed upon the empty dance floor, where just moments before couples had swirled in perfect harmony. The governess sighed with the resignation of one who had repeated this scene countless times. "She will not come when called. I shall have to fetch her bodily again." Something in the woman's tone, not cruelty but the dull acceptance that the child was a burden, sparked an unusual boldness in Mira's breast. "If I may, miss," she ventured, setting down her tray, "perhaps I could try." The governess raised an eyebrow, but weariness overcame propriety. "Very well, though I warn you she speaks to no one." Mira approached slowly, her steps measured against the vast silence of the empty ballroom. As she drew near, she saw tears glistening, unshed in Lady Seren's eyes, tears no one had noticed in the grand pageantry of the evening. Kneeling before the child, Mira did not command or cajole. Instead, she simply extended her hand, palm upward, an invitation rather than a demand. "The music may have stopped," she whispered, "but we might still hear it. Might we not?" The spinning top stilled in the child's grasp. For the first time that evening, Lady Seren's gaze lifted from the floor to meet Mira's own. "Come," Mira whispered, a gentle smile warming her features. "Dance with me." The silence that followed Mira's invitation stretched like gossamer, delicate yet unbroken. Lady Seren's eyes, blue as twilight and just as mysterious, studied the maid's face with an intensity that belied her tender years. The spinning top ceased its motion entirely, clutched now in fingers that had begun to tremble ever so slightly. "She does not understand you," the governess called, her voice a harsh intrusion. "The child has not spoken a word since her Grace's passing. Dr. Sheffield claims it is a nervous affliction of the mind." Mira did not withdraw her outstretched hand. "Perhaps," she replied softly, "there are languages beyond words." The ballroom stood emptied of its glittering throng, yet their phantom presence seemed to linger in the very air, echoes of laughter, the rustle of expensive fabric, the perfumed cloud that hovered still. Against this backdrop of faded opulence, Mira and the silent child formed a tableau of stark simplicity. "I shall count to 3, Mira whispered, as if sharing a cherished secret. 1, the child's gaze flicked to the hand before her. 2, a small intake of breath, barely audible yet profound. 3, with the hesitancy of a fawn testing uncertain ground, Lady Seren placed her tiny hand in Mira's palm. The wooden top tumbled forgotten to the floor, its hollow sound echoing through the cavernous space. "There," murmured Mira, her heart swelling with unexpected tenderness. "You see, not so very difficult after all." She rose slowly, the child rising with her, their hands still clasped in silent communion. Behind them the governess made a sound of astonishment quickly stifled by propriety. "A simple waltz, I think," Mira continued, guiding the child's free hand to her waist. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, just as they did before. Their steps began tentatively, a mere suggestion of the dance that had filled the room hours earlier. Yet with each passing moment, the child's movements grew more assured, her small feet following Mira's lead with increasing confidence. "By heaven," the governess breathed, her customary severity momentarily forgotten. "I have never seen her willingly touch another's hand." The words fell away unheeded, as Mira focused entirely on the child before her. Lady Seren's face had transformed, the rigid mask of solitude giving way to something almost akin to wonder. Her eyes remained dry, but the threatening tears had receded, replaced by a glimmer that might in time become joy. "There now," Mira encouraged, as they completed a full turn. "You dance beautifully, my lady. Your mother would be most proud." The mention of the late Duchess caused no distress. Rather, the child's grip tightened marginally, as if in gratitude for the acknowledgement of that sacred connection. Their quiet reverie shattered like crystal against marble, as the great doors at the far end of the ballroom swung open with sudden violence. The Duke of Halewood stood framed in the archway, his tall figure rigid with barely contained fury. Behind him cowered a young footman, his face pale with the knowledge that he had failed to prevent this confrontation. "What is the meaning of this?" the Duke demanded, his voice dangerously soft, despite the distance that separated them. The governess curtsied deeply, her earlier wonder replaced by naked fear. "Your Grace, the child would not come, and the maid merely—" "Silence!" The single word cut through the woman's stammered explanation like a blade. The Duke strode forward, each step measured and deliberate, the sound of his boots against marble like the approach of judgment itself. His face, handsome still despite the ravages of grief, was set in lines of cold displeasure. Mira immediately ceased their dance and dropped into a curtsy, though she did not release Lady Seren's hand. The child, sensing the shift in atmosphere, pressed closer to Mira's skirts. "Who gave you permission?" the Duke inquired with deadly precision. "To touch my daughter?" Mira raised her eyes, meeting his gaze despite the impropriety of such boldness. "Forgiveness, Your Grace. I saw only a child in need of comfort." "Comfort?" he repeated, the word laden with bitter irony. "And what would a scullery maid know of what my daughter needs?" "I am a lady's maid, Your Grace," Mira corrected gently, "not a scullery maid, and I know that all children, regardless of station, require the same essential kindnesses." The Duke's expression hardened further, if such a thing were possible, yet before he could deliver what would surely be her dismissal, a small sound intervened, the quiet tap of wood against marble. The spinning top had rolled to rest against his polished boot. Lady Seren released Mira's hand and stepped forward, her movements deliberate. With the solemnity of a priestess performing sacred rites, she retrieved her treasure and held it upward, offering it to her father. The spinning top lay in Lady Seren's outstretched palm, its carved whorls catching the gaslight like a miniature constellation. The Duke stared down at it, his expression inscrutable save for a momentary flicker in the depths of his grey eyes, a recognition so profound it bordered on physical pain. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice stripped of its earlier thunder. The child, of course, offered no verbal reply, yet her gaze remained steady upon her father's face, communicating in that mysterious language that Mira had earlier championed. "It was her mother's, was it not?" Mira ventured quietly, knowing full well the impropriety of addressing his Grace without solicitation. Children often seek connection through objects of remembrance. The Duke's attention snapped back to Mira, his scrutiny so intense she felt its weight like a physical presence. "You overstep your place, girl. What is your name?" "Mira Elowin, Your Grace." She dipped into another curtsy, though her eyes did not waver from his. "Miss Elowin believes she possesses unique insight into matters beyond her station," the Duke observed coldly, addressing the governess who hovered anxiously at the periphery of this tense tableau. "Tell me, Mrs. Winters, do you find yourself similarly enlightened by her wisdom?" The governess blanched. I merely thought, that is—" "You did not think," he interrupted. "None of you thought. There are reasons why my daughter's routine remains unaltered, reasons prescribed by physicians far more qualified than a lady's maid, barely out of the schoolroom herself. Throughout this exchange, Lady Seren had not withdrawn her offering. The wooden top remained presented, her small arm beginning to tremble with the effort of maintaining its position. When at last the Duke glanced down again, something in his rigid posture yielded almost imperceptibly. With unexpected gentleness, he took the spinning top from his daughter's hand. "It is late, Seren," he said, using her name for the first time in Mira's hearing. "You should have been abed an hour hence." To the astonishment of all present, the child reached out again, not for the top but for her father's free hand. Her tiny fingers hovered in the narrow gap between them, a bridge waiting to be crossed. The Duke stood frozen, as though confronted by some apparition visible only to his eyes. The moment stretched, fragile as spun glass, until at last he stepped back, the opportunity lost. "Take her to her chambers," he instructed the governess, his voice once again devoid of emotion, "and ensure she is not disturbed." Mrs. Winters hastened forward, taking Lady Seren by the shoulders and steering her toward the door. The child went without resistance, though her gaze lingered on Mira until the last possible moment. When they had gone, silence descended once more upon the vast ballroom. The Duke studied the spinning top in his palm, his thumb tracing the patterns that his daughter's fingers had followed with such devotion. "You have been in my employ for how long, Miss Elowen?" he inquired at length. "3 weeks, Your Grace. And in that brief span, you presume to understand what has eluded her physicians, her governess, and indeed her own father for nearly 3 years?" Mira clasped her hands before her to still their trembling. "I presumed nothing, Your Grace. I merely observed a child yearning for connection and offered what small comfort lay within my power to give." The Duke closed his fingers around the spinning top, concealing it from view. "My late wife carved this on the day we learned Seren was to be born," he said, the words emerging as though drawn unwillingly from some hidden depth. "She believed a child should have beautiful things to touch, not merely to observe from behind glass." The unexpected confidence hung in the air between them, as startling as it was unprecedented. Mira remained silent, sensing that any response might shatter this momentary glimpse into his closely guarded grief. "You will not approach my daughter again," the Duke declared, his tone brooking no possibility of argument. "Your duties will remain strictly confined to those for which you were employed." "As your Grace wishes," Mira replied, though the acquiescence cost her dearly. "Yet if I might make one observation before accepting my censure." His brow lifted in cold surprise at her continued temerity. "You test the boundaries of forbearance, Miss Elowen." "Lady Seren took my hand willingly," Mira said simply. "Perhaps that signifies more than my presumption." For an instant, something unnameable crossed the Duke's features. A recognition, perhaps, or a possibility too painful to acknowledge. Then it was gone, replaced by the impenetrable mask of aristocratic reserve. "Good evening, Miss Elowen," he said with finality, turning toward the door. "I trust there will be no need for us to speak again." Mira curtsied deeply as protocol demanded, but her eyes followed his retreating figure with undisguised concern. In his hand, the Duchess's spinning top remained clutched like a talisman against the encroaching darkness of memory. "What we need and what we believe we need are often at war within us, Your Grace," she whispered to the empty air where he had stood. "Even dukes are not immune to such battles." The gaslight flickered, throwing shadows that danced across the floor, where moments earlier a silent child had briefly found her voice through movement. Tomorrow would bring consequences, Mira knew, yet she could not bring herself to regret the moment when Lady Seren's hand had touched her own in tentative trust. Some risks, her heart whispered, were worth any price that might follow. Dawn arrived with the muted elegance particular to grand houses, filtering through lace curtains and settling upon polished surfaces like a benediction. Mira moved through the east wing with practiced efficiency, arranging Lady Montgomery's toilette for the day ahead. The visiting Countess was a distant cousin to the Duke, arrived 3 days prior with the unspoken purpose of evaluating Lady Seren's progress, or lack thereof. "The child barely acknowledged my presence yesterday," Lady Montgomery remarked, as Mira arranged her hair into an intricate coiffure. "Alistair does her no favours by isolating her thus. A child requires society to flourish." "Perhaps Lady Seren simply requires a different approach, my lady," Mira suggested, carefully securing a pearl-tipped pin. The Countess's gaze met Mira's in the looking-glass. "You speak as one who knows her. Yet I understand you've scarce been here a month." Mira felt heat rise to her cheeks. News of her transgression in the ballroom had evidently circulated among the household, though she had thus far escaped formal censure. I merely observed that quiet children often notice more than we credit them for. The Countess pursed her lips. Alistair was similarly reserved as a child. Before Meliora, she trailed off, seemingly conscious of having shared too much with a servant. That will do for my hair. The blue walking dress, I think. As Mira assisted with the final preparations for the Countess's morning constitutional, a timid knock sounded at the chamber door. A young housemaid curtsied nervously upon entering. "Begging your pardon, Miss Elowen, but Mrs. Harren requests your presence in the east parlour directly." Mira's stomach tightened with apprehension. The head housekeeper summoned staff only for matters of grave import, typically to deliver reprimands or dismissals. "You'd best go," Lady Montgomery advised with surprising gentleness. "I can manage my gloves without assistance." The journey to the east parlour seemed interminable, each step bringing Mira closer to what she feared would be her dismissal. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind with merciless clarity: the Duke's cold fury, his explicit command that she not approach Lady Seren again. Yet even now, facing the likely end of her position, she could not regret her actions. Mrs. Harren waited in the parlour, her tall figure silhouetted against the morning light. "Miss Elowen. Prompt, at least. That speaks in your favour. Have I been called to receive my notice, Mrs. Harren?" Mira asked directly, preferring the swift cut of certainty to prolonged anxiety. "Not precisely." The housekeeper's expression remained unreadable. "Though by all rights you ought to be halfway to London by now. His Grace's tolerance for impertinence is not renowned for its breadth." Before Mira could respond, the parlour door opened once more. Mrs. Winters entered, leading Lady Seren by the hand. The child's expression brightened visibly upon seeing Mira, though no sound escaped her lips. "What is the meaning of this?" Mira asked, confusion temporarily overriding protocol. "I was instructed explicitly to maintain distance from Lady Seren." "Indeed you were," confirmed a deep voice from the threshold. The Duke of Halewood entered the parlour with the controlled grace of one accustomed to commanding attention without effort. His formal morning attire emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, the sombre charcoal fabric relieved only by a silver watch chain that caught the light as he moved. "Yet it appears," he continued, "that my daughter has formed her own opinion on the matter." Mrs. Winters stepped forward. "Your Grace, I must report that Lady Seren has refused her breakfast, her lessons, and indeed any engagement whatsoever since yesterday evening. She has done nothing but sit by her window, clutching this." From her pocket, the governess produced a scrap of lace, the edge of a handkerchief that Mira recognized as her own. It must have caught on Lady Seren's dress during their brief dance. "When I attempted to remove it," Mrs. Winters continued, "she became most distressed, the first display of any strong emotion in many months." The Duke studied his daughter, who now stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed upon Mira with quiet intensity. "Dr. Sheffield suggests that we not disrupt patterns once established," he said slowly, as though testing each word before releasing it. "It seems my daughter has established a new pattern." He turned to Mira, his expression inscrutable. "Against my better judgment, Miss Elowen, I am altering your duties. You will attend Lady Seren for 2 hours each afternoon, in addition to your regular responsibilities." Mira could not suppress her astonishment. "Your Grace, I am honored by your trust." "Do not mistake necessity for trust," he corrected sharply. "Mrs. Winters will remain present throughout these sessions. You will engage my daughter in whatever activity prompted her response last night, but you will not," here his voice hardened, "fill her head with fanciful notions or speak to her of matters beyond her understanding." Lady Seren moved then, crossing the room to stand before Mira. With solemn deliberation she held out her hand, not in need, but in offering. Upon her small palm lay the wooden spinning top. "She has not relinquished that since His Grace returned it to her collection this morning," Mrs. Winters explained. "I believe she wishes to show it to Miss Elowen." Mira knelt to the child's level, a gesture that drew a sharp intake of breath from Mrs. Harren at its impropriety. "It's beautiful, my lady," she said softly. "Thank you for showing me." The faintest suggestion of a smile touched Lady Seren's lips, so brief that Mira might have imagined it, had not the Duke made a strangled sound that drew all eyes to his stricken face. "That expression," he murmured, more to himself than to those present, "precisely like her mother." For an instant, the armour of grief and reserve fell away, revealing not the austere Duke, but simply a man, wounded, weary, and desperately seeking a path through his sorrow. Then, as swiftly as it had appeared, the vulnerability vanished behind his customary mask of control. "Begin tomorrow," he instructed briskly. Mrs. Winters will establish a suitable schedule. With that, he departed, leaving an atmosphere charged with unspoken possibilities and equally unspoken dangers. The library at Thornfield Hall stood as a testament to generations of scholarly pursuit, its towering shelves laden with leather-bound volumes that carried the wisdom of ages. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating motes of dust that danced like minuscule sprites in its golden beams. Within this hallowed sanctuary of knowledge, Mira sat beside Lady Seren at a rosewood table, a selection of illustrated books spread before them. 2 weeks had passed since the Duke's unexpected mandate. Each afternoon, Mira attended the silent child, their activities varied but constrained by Mrs. Winters's vigilant presence. Today, the governess sat at a discreet distance, her needlework providing the pretense of occupation, while her attention remained fixed upon their interaction. "Perhaps this one, my lady?" Mira suggested, opening a volume of botanical illustrations. "The colours are most extraordinary." Lady Seren considered the offering with grave concentration before shaking her head decisively. Her small hands reached instead for a slender book, half hidden beneath a weightier tome. The gilt lettering on its spine read simply, "Dance Forms of the European Courts." Mrs. Winters cleared her throat meaningfully. "Lady Seren, we have discussed this matter. His Grace does not approve of that particular subject." The child's features remained impassive, but her fingers tightened around the book's edge with unmistakable determination. Mira intervened gently. "Perhaps we might simply admire the historical costumes depicted within, the artistic value alone. Miss Elowen," the governess's voice carried the chill of authority, "you would do well to remember the specific limitations placed upon these sessions." The unspoken warning hung in the air like the threatening rumble of distant thunder. Mira hesitated, caught between respect for established boundaries and her growing conviction that Lady Seren's silence concealed not absence, but abundance, thoughts and feelings too complex for conventional expression. Before she could formulate a diplomatic response, the library door opened to admit Lady Montgomery, resplendent in afternoon visiting dress. "Ah, there you are, Seren, dear," the Countess declared, sweeping forward in a rustle of expensive silk. "And engaged in scholarly pursuits, I see. How commendable." Mrs. Winters rose immediately, offering a respectful curtsy. "Lady Montgomery, we did not expect your presence this afternoon." "Evidently," the Countess replied with a pointed glance at the contested book still clasped in Lady Seren's hands. "I find myself at leisure and thought to observe my young cousin's progress myself. Alistair speaks so little of it." Her shrewd gaze moved to Mira, softening almost imperceptibly. "Miss Elowen, you appear to have established something of a rapport with the child." "Lady Seren is most receptive to gentle encouragement, my lady," Mira answered carefully, conscious of the political currents swirling beneath this seemingly casual visitation. Lady Montgomery settled herself into a nearby armchair, arranging her skirts with practiced elegance. "Do continue with your lesson, I shall merely observe." Mrs. Winters's expression betrayed her discomfort at this unexpected scrutiny. "We were just concluding today's session, my lady. Lady Seren has her music practice shortly." "Nonsense, I specifically inquired after her schedule this morning." The Countess waved a dismissive hand. "There is ample time. Now, what volume has captured her interest so thoroughly?" Lady Seren, as though sensing an ally, extended the book toward Lady Montgomery. The Countess accepted it, her eyebrows rising as she noted the title. "Dance Forms. How fascinating." She leafed through the pages with deliberate attention. "Ah, the quadrille. Your mother excelled at this particular dance, Seren. She quite dazzled the Prince Regent himself at her debut ball." The child's eyes widened, her entire posture shifting from passive resistance to rapt attention. Mrs. Winters intervened hurriedly. "Lady Montgomery, His Grace has specified that Lady Seren not be unduly influenced by reminders of the late Duchess." "Has he indeed?" The Countess's tone could have frozen the Thames in midsummer. "How curious that Alistair believes memory can be governed by decree. Memory, like water, will always find its path, regardless of the barriers we erect." She turned to Lady Seren, her expression softening. "Your mother loved to dance, child. When she moved, it was as though music had taken human form." She extended the book, open to an illustration of dancers in mid-figure. "Do you see how they hold their hands? Just so." To Mira's astonishment, Lady Seren rose from her chair and attempted to position her arms according to the illustration. The movement was tentative, unpracticed, yet executed with such earnest concentration that it brought an unexpected tightness to Mira's throat. Excellent, my dear, Lady Montgomery encouraged. Now the feet. This is most improper. Mrs. Winters stood abruptly. I must insist we conclude immediately. His Grace was most explicit. His Grace, interrupted a deep voice from the doorway, finds himself surrounded by women intent upon countermanding his instructions. The Duke filled the entrance to the library, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the sunlit floor. His expression betrayed no emotion, save for a tightening at the corners of his mouth that spoke of carefully controlled displeasure. Lady Seren's arms dropped instantly to her sides, her brief animation extinguished like a candle snuffed by a careless hand. "Cousin," Lady Montgomery greeted him with unruffled composure, "how fortunate that you join us. Seren has been displaying a most natural aptitude for the dance forms that so distinguished her lineage. I expressly forbade such activities," the Duke replied, his voice deceptively mild, "as I believe all present were well aware." Mira stood, placing herself slightly before Lady Seren in an instinctive gesture of protection. "Forgive me, Your Grace. The fault is entirely mine. I permitted Lady Seren to select the volume, knowing its contents might not meet with your approval." The lie fell from her lips with surprising ease, driven by the certainty that she, unlike Mrs. Winters, would face no permanent consequences for such defiance. The governess's livelihood depended entirely upon the Duke's favor. Mira's did not. The Duke's gaze shifted to her, his eyes narrowing slightly as though he perceived the untruth but chose not to challenge it directly. "Your dedication to assuming responsibility does you credit, Miss Elowen, however misplaced." He turned to his daughter, who now stood perfectly still, her face once more an unreadable mask. "Seren, you will accompany Mrs. Winters to the music room. Now." The child did not move. Instead, her small hand reached out, seeking Mira's with unmistakable intent. "Seren," the Duke's voice hardened, "I shall not repeat myself." Lady Montgomery rose, inserting herself between father and daughter with practiced social grace. "Alistair, a moment of your time in private, if you please. There are matters regarding Halewood's eastern properties that require your immediate attention." The transparent pretext hung awkwardly in the air, fooling no one yet offering a dignified retreat from the brewing confrontation. After a moment's tense silence, the Duke inclined his head fractionally. "Very well, Mrs. Winters, escort my daughter to the music room. Miss Elowen, you are dismissed until tomorrow." As Mira curtsied and turned to leave, she felt a small hand brush against her skirts, the lightest of touches, yet eloquent in its silent farewell. When she dared glance back, Lady Seren was watching her with an expression that transcended her years, combining childish longing with something deeper, more knowing. The moment passed in the space of a heartbeat, leaving Mira to wonder if she had imagined the flash of understanding that passed between them, a recognition of shared purpose in the quiet revolution taking place within Thornfield's austere walls. The portrait gallery stretched along the western wing of Thornfield Hall, its walls hung with generations of Thalans who gazed down with aristocratic hauteur from gilded frames. Mira moved quietly through this corridor of painted eyes, carrying a fresh arrangement of hothouse flowers destined for Lady Montgomery's chambers. The afternoon light slanted through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor and illuminating motes of dust that danced in its golden beams. She paused before a portrait larger than the others, a woman in her early 20s, fair-haired and luminous, against a backdrop of muted greens. Unlike the stern expressions of her painted companions, this subject wore a smile of such gentle radiance that it seemed to warm the entire gallery. "The late Duchess," came a voice from behind her, "painted in her first season as Alistair's wife." Mira turned to find Lady Montgomery regarding her with an inscrutable expression. "Forgive me, my lady, I was delivering these to your chambers." "And found yourself captivated by Meliora." The Countess moved to stand beside her, both women now facing the portrait. Understandable. She had that effect on everyone she encountered. The resemblance between mother and daughter was unmistakable, the same delicate features, the same thoughtful eyes. Yet where Lady Seren's gaze held shadows of unspoken sorrow, her mother's shone with unabashed joy. "She looks very happy," Mira observed softly. She was. Lady Montgomery's voice carried a wistful note. "Meliora brought light into rooms merely by entering them. When she—" The Countess paused, composing herself. "When she was lost to childbed fever, it was as though someone had extinguished every candle in Alistair's world at once." Mira studied the portrait more carefully, noting details she had missed at first glance. The Duchess held a small wooden object in her hands, the spinning top that now belonged to Lady Seren. "She carved it herself, Lady Montgomery explained, following Mira's gaze. Meliora believed that children should have beautiful things made with love, not merely purchased with wealth. The revelation settled like a physical weight upon Mira's heart. And His Grace forbids Lady Seren from dancing because Meliora lived for it, the Countess confirmed. They met at a midsummer ball. I was present that night. The moment he saw her, Alistair stood transfixed as though he'd been struck by lightning in clear skies. She sighed, the sound heavy with remembrance. He cannot bear to see Seren follow her mother's path, for fear of losing her to the same passions that defined Meliora. The complexity of grief revealed in this confession left Mira momentarily speechless. How could one protect a child from their own inheritance of joy? Last night, Lady Montgomery continued, her tone shifting to something more purposeful, I spoke at length with my cousin regarding his daughter's welfare. I believe I may have made some small impression, though Alistair guards his decisions as jealously as his heart. Before Mira could respond, the distinctive tap of approaching footsteps echoed through the gallery. Mrs. Harren appeared at the far end, her expression suggesting urgent business. Miss Elowen, the housekeeper called, you are required in the blue drawing room immediately. Lady Montgomery smiled faintly. It appears our conversation must be curtailed. Do not concern yourself with these flowers. I shall see them placed myself. The blue drawing room, situated in the family wing of Thornfield, was a space Mira had entered only once before, during her initial tour of the house. Its sapphire walls and silver accents created an atmosphere of cool elegance, the effect heightened by tall windows that captured the northern light. She found the Duke standing before the fireplace, his posture rigid even in solitude. At her entrance, he turned, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Miss Elowen, I trust I did not interrupt duties of great importance. No, Your Grace. She curtsied, careful to maintain the precise degree of deference required. How may I be of service? He studied her for a moment, as though attempting to reconcile her present composure with her earlier defiance in the library. I have been giving consideration to my daughter's education, he said finally. It appears that conventional methods have proven insufficient. Mira remained silent, sensing that interruption would not be welcomed. Lady Montgomery suggests, with characteristic forcefulness, that Seren might benefit from a more creative approach to her development. The words emerged with evident reluctance, as though extracted under duress. An approach that might include certain physical activities previously deemed unsuitable. Understanding dawned slowly, accompanied by a flutter of cautious hope. Your Grace refers to dancing? I refer to controlled movement, he corrected sharply, under strict supervision and with clearly defined limitations. He moved to a side table where a sheet of paper lay waiting. I have outlined a modified schedule for your afternoon sessions with my daughter. Mrs. Winters will continue to supervise, but you will be permitted greater latitude in activities deemed beneficial to Seren's development. Mira accepted the document, scanning its contents with carefully concealed excitement. Among the approved pursuits listed in the Duke's precise handwriting was introductory movement exercises derived from traditional dance forms. This is most generous, Your Grace, she said, genuine gratitude warming her voice. Lady Seren will be delighted. My daughter's delight is not the objective, he replied curtly. Her welfare is my sole concern. Should these sessions prove detrimental in any fashion, they will cease immediately and permanently. His gaze held hers with unwavering intensity. Let me be explicitly clear, Miss Elowen. This concession does not constitute approval of your previous interference in matters beyond your station. It is a measured experiment, undertaken at my cousin's insistence and against my better judgment. The warning was unmistakable, yet beneath its harsh delivery, Mira sensed something else, a desperate hope, perhaps, that this experiment might succeed where all others had failed. I understand perfectly, Your Grace, she answered quietly, and I shall honor your trust with the utmost care. A flicker of something passed across his features, not quite softening, but a momentary lapse in the rigid control he maintained. Seren has responded to you in a manner unprecedented since her mother's passing. I would know why. The directness of the question caught Mira unprepared. Truth seemed the only appropriate response. Perhaps because I see her, Your Grace, not merely her silence or her sorrow, but her complete self. And I do not? The words emerged soft yet dangerous, like steel wrapped in velvet. Forgive me, but I believe you see your own grief reflected in her, Mira replied, surprising herself with her boldness, which is not the same as seeing her as she is now or as she might become. She expected anger, perhaps even immediate dismissal. Instead, the Duke turned away, his profile sharp against the afternoon light. When he spoke again, his voice carried an unfamiliar quality, a vulnerability carefully controlled yet unmistakably present. "Begin tomorrow. The music room will provide suitable space for your exercises. Mrs. Winters has been instructed accordingly." The formal dismissal in his tone was clear. Mira curtsied deeply, turning to leave before her good fortune could be reversed by some misstep. "Miss Elowen," she paused at the threshold, looking back. "Do not mistake this concession for weakness," the Duke said, his eyes meeting hers with flinty resolve. "I will always act in my daughter's best interest, regardless of cost." "As would any father worthy of the name, Your Grace," Mira replied softly. "On that I believe we stand in perfect accord." The music room at Thornfield Hall had stood largely unused since the Duchess's passing. Dust covers shrouded the pianoforte and harp, lending the chamber the air of a forgotten shrine. Tall windows faced east, capturing morning light that seemed almost hesitant to disturb the room's solemn quietude. It was here that Mira awaited Lady Sirene for their first sanctioned movement session, her hands clasped tightly to conceal their slight trembling. Mrs. Winters arrived precisely at the appointed hour, leading Lady Sirene by the hand. The child's expression brightened visibly upon seeing Mira, though as always, no sound escaped her lips. "His Grace has instructed me to remind you of the boundaries established," the governess began, consulting a small notebook. "Physical exertion must not exceed 15 minutes. Lady Sirene must not be encouraged in displays of emotional excess. All movements must maintain proper decorum suitable to her station." Mira acknowledged these directives with appropriate gravity, though inwardly she wondered at the fear that drove such rigid constraints. What damage could possibly arise from a child's simple joy in movement? "I shall observe from this position," Mrs. Winters continued, settling herself in a chair near the door. "You may proceed." Kneeling before Lady Sirene, Mira smiled gently. "Good afternoon, my lady. I thought perhaps we might begin by removing these dust covers and allowing some light into this beautiful room. Would you assist me?" The child nodded, her solemn gaze following Mira to the nearest shrouded shape, a delicate occasional table bearing what appeared to be a music box. Together they lifted the protective cloth, revealing an exquisite rosewood case inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "How lovely," Mira murmured, carefully opening the lid. A soft melody immediately filled the room, a simple waltz rendered in clear, bell-like tones. "I believe this is a polonaise in E minor. Do you know it, my lady?" Lady Sirene's eyes widened in recognition. Her small fingers reached toward the music box, hovering just above its surface as though afraid direct contact might shatter some precious spell. "It was Her Grace's favorite," Mrs. Winters remarked unexpectedly, her customary severity momentarily softened by remembrance. She would play it often during her confinements. The revelation lent the delicate melody additional poignancy. Mira watched as Lady Sirene swayed almost imperceptibly to the rhythm, her body remembering what her conscious mind perhaps could not. "Shall we move a little?" Mira suggested, extending her hands. "Just as we did that evening in the ballroom?" The child hesitated, glancing toward Mrs. Winters, as though seeking permission. "His Grace has approved basic movement exercises," the governess confirmed stiffly, "though I must insist upon propriety at all times." It was concession enough. Lady Sirene placed her small hands in Mira's, allowing herself to be guided into a simple box step that matched the music box's gentle tempo. At first, her movements were tentative, uncertain, but as the minutes passed, a remarkable transformation occurred. The rigid posture gradually softened, her steps becoming more fluid, more assured. "Excellent, my lady," Mira encouraged. "You have a natural grace." A sound from the doorway caused all three to turn. The Duke stood at the threshold, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the polished floor. How long he had been observing them, Mira could not guess, but his expression betrayed no anger, merely a watchfulness so intense it seemed almost tangible. Mrs. Winters rose immediately. "Your Grace, we were just continuing as instructed," he completed for her, entering the room with measured steps. "Do not let my presence interrupt." The music box completed its melody and fell silent, leaving an expectant hush in its wake. Lady Sirene had frozen in place, her earlier animation replaced by the familiar mask of cautious reserve. To everyone's astonishment, the Duke approached the music box and rewound its mechanism. The polonaise began anew, filling the stillness with its bittersweet refrain. "This belonged to your mother," he said to Lady Seren, his voice carefully controlled. "She brought it from her family home when we married." It was the first time Mira had heard him refer directly to the late Duchess in his daughter's presence. The effect on Lady Seren was immediate. She took a step toward him, her expression suddenly vulnerable with hope. The Duke seemed momentarily at a loss, as though having opened a door he now found himself unsure whether to proceed through it or retreat to safer ground. His gaze shifted to Mira, containing something that might, in another man, have been interpreted as a plea for guidance. Understanding instinctively what was needed, Mira stepped back, creating space between herself and Lady Seren. "Perhaps His Grace might demonstrate the proper form for a polonaise," she suggested. "I fear my humble instruction falls short of true elegance." Mrs. Winters inhaled sharply at this presumption, but the Duke silenced any objection with a slight gesture of his hand. For a long moment he remained motionless, internal struggle evident in the tension of his shoulders. Then, with deliberate formality, he extended his hand to his daughter. "Lady Seren," he said, the words emerging with careful precision, "would you grant me the honor of this dance?" The child's face transformed with such incandescent joy that Mira felt her heart constrict painfully in her chest. With grave dignity belying her years, Lady Seren placed her tiny hand in her father's much larger one, allowing him to guide her into the first position of the dance. Their movements were hesitant at first, the Duke clearly rusty in the practice, his daughter unfamiliar with the steps. Yet there was something profoundly moving in their awkward efforts, something more truthful than any polished performance could have conveyed. Mira retreated to stand beside Mrs. Winters, whose expression had softened into something approaching wonder. "I never thought to see this day," the governess whispered. "His Grace has not entered this room since before Lady Seren was born." The music box played on, its mechanism occasionally catching and slowing before resuming its tempo. Father and daughter continued their halting dance, neither seeming to notice these imperfections. When the melody finally wound down, they stood together in the center of the room, still connected by their clasped hands. "Your mother would be pleased with your aptitude," the Duke said quietly. She believed that music lived not merely in the ear, but in the body's response to it. Lady Seren gazed up at him with such naked adoration that even Mrs. Winters turned away, perhaps feeling herself an intruder upon a moment too intimate for witnesses. The Duke cleared his throat, composure reasserting itself like a familiar garment donned after brief absence. "That will be sufficient for today. Mrs. Winters, please escort Lady Seren to her chambers for her afternoon rest." As the governess moved to comply, Lady Seren did something unprecedented. She pulled free from Mrs. Winters's grasp and ran back to her father, wrapping her arms around his waist in a spontaneous embrace. The Duke stood rigid with surprise, his hands hovering uncertainly before settling, with infinite gentleness, upon his daughter's shoulders. "Go now," he said, his voice betraying the faintest tremor. "We shall continue another day." When Lady Seren had been led away, silence once more descended upon the music room. Mira began replacing the dust covers, hyper-conscious of the Duke's continued presence. "Leave them," he instructed. "This room has been shuttered too long." She turned to find him regarding her with an expression she could not interpret. Not anger, certainly, but something equally potent. "You orchestrated that moment deliberately," he observed. "Not an accusation, merely a statement of fact." Mira inclined her head slightly. "I believed it might benefit Lady Seren to dance with her father rather than a servant." "And what of the father?" he inquired, his tone deceptively casual. "Did you consider what it might cost him?" The question hung between them, fraught with layers of meaning beyond its simple phrasing. Mira met his gaze steadily, offering the only answer truth would permit. "Some prices, Your Grace, are worth paying." Summer descended upon Thornfield with languid splendor, painting the gardens in vibrant hues and warming the ancient stone until it seemed to radiate golden light. 6 weeks had passed since that watershed moment in the music room. 6 weeks of cautious progress, during which Lady Seren's silent world had gradually expanded to include daily movement sessions that increasingly resembled proper dancing. The Duke's participation remained intermittent and unpredictable. Some days he appeared at the threshold, observing in silence before departing without comment. On rare occasions he would join them, allowing his daughter to lead him through simple figures she had learned under Mira's guidance. These moments retained a sacred quality, as though each represented another stone laid carefully across a chasm of grief. "You have achieved a minor miracle," Lady Montgomery remarked to Mira one afternoon as they watched Lady Seren practicing a basic waltz turn in the garden pavilion. Alistair speaks of you with something approaching respect. No small feat for one in your position. Mira adjusted the ribbon in her charge's hair, conscious of the impropriety of such a conversation. His Grace merely recognizes his daughter's progress, my lady. I serve only as instrument to that end. The Countess's expression suggested she found this assessment inadequate. Modesty becomes you, Miss Elowen, but false modesty does not. The change in both father and daughter is self-evident to any with eyes to see. Before Mira could formulate an appropriately humble response, Lady Seren tugged at her sleeve, directing her attention to a butterfly that had alighted on a nearby rosebush. The child's face betrayed such innocent wonder that Mira felt momentarily breathless with gratitude for the privilege of witnessing this small joy. She is becoming her mother's daughter again, Lady Montgomery observed softly. Meliora could never pass a butterfly without following its path, no matter how many times her governesses scolded her for ruining her slippers in the dew. The comparison seemed to please Lady Seren, who smiled one of her rare, luminous smiles that transformed her solemn features into a portrait of childish delight. These expressions came more frequently now, though they remained precious in their scarcity. The midsummer ball is but a fortnight hence, the Countess continued. The first Thornfield has hosted since Meliora's passing. I have persuaded Alistair that Seren should attend, if only for the opening set. Mira concealed her surprise at this announcement. The Duke had expanded his daughter's privileges gradually, but a formal social occasion represented a significant leap beyond their controlled private sessions. His Grace must have great confidence in Lady Seren's progress, she ventured cautiously. Lady Montgomery's lips curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile. His Grace required substantial persuasion. However, I believe he recognizes that his daughter cannot remain forever cloistered within these walls, however safe they might seem. The Countess rose, smoothing her elegant afternoon dress with practiced hands. You will, of course, attend her throughout the evening. Mrs. Winters lacks both the temperament and the understanding to manage Serene in such a setting. It was not a request, but a statement of fact, delivered with aristocratic certainty that her wishes would be implemented without question. Before Mira could respond, a footman appeared at the garden path, his expression suggesting urgent business. Begging your pardon, my lady, but His Grace requests Lady Montgomery's presence in the library immediately. A messenger has arrived from London with documents requiring attention. The Countess sighed with theatrical resignation. Duty calls as ever. Miss Elowen, pray continue with Seren until her afternoon rest. As Lady Montgomery departed, Mira turned to find Lady Seren watching her with unusual intensity, as though attempting to communicate some urgent message through gaze alone. What is it, my lady? She inquired, kneeling to the child's level. Lady Seren reached into the pocket of her pinafore and withdrew a folded piece of paper. With solemn ceremony, she pressed it into Mira's hand, her eyes never leaving Mira's face. Puzzled, Mira unfolded the paper to reveal a drawing executed with remarkable skill for a child so young. It depicted 3 figures standing hand in hand before what appeared to be Thornfield Hall, a tall man, a small child, and between them, a woman whose simple dress marked her as distinctly not aristocratic. Is this us? Mira asked softly, recognition dawning with a peculiar ache in her chest. Lady Seren nodded, her expression suddenly vulnerable with hope. It's beautiful, my lady. You have your mother's artistic talent, I think. She carefully refolded the drawing. Shall I keep this safe for you? The child shook her head decisively, pointing first to the drawing and then to Mira with unmistakable intent. You wish me to have it? Mira clarified, touched beyond measure by the gesture. Another nod, more emphatic than before. I am honored beyond words, Mira said truthfully, tucking the precious gift into her own pocket. Thank you, Lady Seren. The moment of connection was interrupted by the distant chiming of the hall clock, signaling the hour of Lady Seren's afternoon rest. As they made their way back toward the house, Mira found herself troubled by the implications of the child's drawing. The image suggested a family configuration that reality could never permit, a dangerous fantasy that might eventually cause pain to its innocent creator. Her contemplation was cut short as they entered the main hall to find the Duke engaged in conversation with a visitor, a gentleman of perhaps 30 years, impeccably attired in the latest London fashion. Both men turned at their approach, the stranger's gaze moving with frank curiosity between Mira and Lady Seren. Ah, perfect timing, the Duke said, his tone betraying none of the warmth he occasionally displayed in private. Lord Pembroke, may I present my daughter, Lady Seren Thallon? The gentleman bowed with practiced elegance. "Lady Seren, your father speaks of you with great pride." To everyone's visible surprise, Lady Seren did not shrink from the stranger's attention, as had been her custom. Instead, she executed a small curtsy, her movements displaying the grace she had cultivated over recent weeks. "Remarkable," Lord Pembroke murmured, glancing at the Duke. "You did not exaggerate her progress." The Duke's expression softened marginally. "Miss Elowen, please escort Lady Seren to Mrs. Winters for her afternoon rest. You may then attend Lady Montgomery, who has expressed a desire to review preparations for the midsummer ball." As Mira curtsied and turned to leave, she caught the visiting gentleman watching her with undisguised interest, an attention that caused immediate discomfort. "The maid appears to have established quite a rapport with your daughter," she heard him remark to the Duke as they departed. "One hopes such familiarity will not prove problematic as she matures." The Duke's response was lost as they ascended the stairs, but its tenor could easily be imagined. Mira guided Lady Seren to her chambers, with a curious heaviness settling in her chest, a reminder of the vast social chasm that separated her from her charge, and, by extension, from the Duke himself. Mrs. Winters awaited them, her sharp gaze noting Lady Seren's flushed cheeks and loosened hair ribbon with silent disapproval. "Lady Montgomery mentioned a midsummer ball," Mira said as she transferred Lady Seren to the governess's care. "Has His Grace confirmed Lady Seren's attendance?" "Indeed," Mrs. Winters replied, her tone suggesting limited enthusiasm for the prospect. "Though I advised against such premature exposure to society, the child remains unpredictable in her responses." Mira studied Lady Seren, who now sat quietly by the window, her attention captured by a volume of botanical illustrations. "She has made remarkable progress these past weeks. Perhaps His Grace believes the time appropriate for a small step into wider society." "His Grace," Mrs. Winters responded tartly, "has become increasingly susceptible to influence where his daughter's upbringing is concerned, a circumstance that some might exploit to their advantage." The implication hung in the air, impossible to misinterpret or ignore. Mira met the governess's gaze directly, refusing to be cowed by the unjust insinuation. "I have only Lady Seren's welfare at heart," she stated quietly, "as I believe we all do." Mrs. Winters sniffed skeptically. "Intentions matter less than consequences, Miss Elowen. Remember your place in this household, lest you inspire hopes that reality cannot sustain." The warning, delivered with cold precision, echoed Mira's own earlier misgivings about Lady Seren's drawing. Before she could formulate a response, Lady Seren crossed the room to stand beside her, slipping a small hand into hers with unmistakable possessiveness. "Your duties with Lady Seren are concluded for today," Mrs. Winters said, her disapproval evident in every syllable. "Lady Montgomery awaits you in the blue drawing room." With a final reassuring squeeze of Lady Seren's hand, Mira departed, her thoughts in turmoil. The growing attachment between herself and her charge had seemed only beneficial until now, a bridge across the silence that had imprisoned the child. Yet Mrs. Winters's warning carried the weight of uncomfortable truth. What would happen when Lady Seren eventually rejoined society in full? Would not the bond they had formed ultimately prove an impediment to the child's proper development within her rightful sphere? And what of her own inexplicable awareness of the Duke, an awareness that had evolved from initial intimidation to something far more complex and dangerous? "Some prices," she whispered to herself, echoing her own words to him weeks earlier, "are worth paying." Yet as she made her way to the blue drawing room, she could not help but wonder if the price might ultimately prove higher than any of them had anticipated. The night of the midsummer ball arrived, with all the pageantry Thornfield Hall had not witnessed in years. Carriages lined the sweeping drive, disgorging the county's finest families in a procession of silks, satins, and hereditary jewels that caught the light of strategically placed torches. The great house blazed with illumination, every window aglow as though Thornfield itself celebrated this return to society after its long period of mourning. In Lady Seren's chambers, final preparations were underway, amid an atmosphere of barely contained excitement. The child sat before her dressing table, uncharacteristically still, as Mira arranged white rosebuds in her fair hair. Her gown of pale blue silk had been specially commissioned for the occasion, simple enough for a child her age, yet bearing subtle embellishments that marked it as the work of London's finest modiste. "You look beautiful, my lady," Mira said softly, securing the last rosebud with a pearl-tipped pin. "Your mother would be so proud." At the mention of the Duchess, Lady Seren's gaze lifted to meet Mira's in the looking-glass. No words passed between them, yet understanding flowed as clearly as if spoken aloud, gratitude, nervousness, and beneath it all, a tremulous hope. "His Grace will escort you down for the opening dance only," Mrs. Winters reminded them from her position by the door. "After which Miss Elowen will bring Lady Seren directly back to her chambers. There is to be no lingering, regardless of how the child may plead." The governess's severe expression softened marginally as she regarded her charge. "Though I must acknowledge she looks most presentable. Your efforts with her appearance are adequate, Miss Elowen." From Mrs. Winters, this constituted high praise indeed. Mira acknowledged it with a gracious nod, too focused on Lady Serene's well-being to dwell on personal vindication. A soft knock heralded Lady Montgomery's arrival. The Countess swept into the room in a rustle of emerald silk, her throat and wrists adorned with Halewood emeralds that spoke to her status within the family. "Exquisite," she declared, circling Lady Seren with evident approval. "A perfect blend of childhood innocence and aristocratic bearing. Alistair will be speechless." Lady Seren beamed under this praise, her usual solemnity giving way to barely suppressed excitement. She twirled once, allowing the silk skirts to billow around her ankles in a manner that would have been deemed unseemly mere months ago. "Carefully now," Mrs. Winters cautioned, though without her customary sharpness. "We must maintain decorum, particularly tonight." The Countess waved away this concern. "Nonsense. A child should express joy freely, especially on such an occasion." She extended her hand to Lady Seren. "Come, my dear. Your father awaits at the foot of the grand staircase. It is time for Thornfield to witness the return of its princess." As they proceeded through the family wing toward the grand staircase, Mira felt a curious blend of pride and melancholy settle in her chest. The past weeks had witnessed such transformation in Lady Seren, from silent shadow to a child capable of genuine animation, yet tonight would mark the beginning of her reintegration into her proper social sphere, a world in which Mira herself existed only as auxiliary support. "Remember," Lady Montgomery murmured as they approached the staircase, "3 dances only." His Grace was most explicit. "We must not overtax her on this first social venture." The grand staircase descended in a sweeping curve to the entrance hall, where the Duke stood in formal evening attire, his commanding presence drawing respectful nods from arriving guests. At their appearance at the top of the stairs, he looked up, his expression changing in a manner visible even from a distance. "Ah," breathed Lady Montgomery with satisfaction, "just as I predicted." The Duke moved to the foot of the staircase, his gaze fixed upon his daughter with an intensity that seemed to exclude all else. As Lady Seren descended on the Countess's arm, Mira following at a discreet distance, the murmured conversations in the entrance hall gradually fell silent, guests turning to witness this tableau. "Lady Seren," the Duke said formally as she reached him, extending his hand, "you do Thornfield great honor this evening." The child placed her small hand in his with perfect composure, executing a curtsy that drew appreciative murmurs from watching guests. When she straightened, her eyes sought Mira's over her father's shoulder, seeking reassurance. Mira nodded encouragement, conscious of her place in the shadows of this glittering scene. The Duke, noting the direction of his daughter's gaze, turned slightly. "Miss Elowen will remain in attendance throughout the evening," he assured Lady Seren, "though I trust you will find the festivities engaging enough without her intervention." The subtle reminder of proper distance stung more than Mira expected. She stepped further back, assuming the invisible posture expected of servants during formal occasions. Lady Montgomery, ever the consummate social strategist, deftly guided father and daughter toward the ballroom. "The opening quadrille awaits, Alistair. Let us not keep your guests in suspense any longer." The ballroom of Thornfield Hall had been transformed for the occasion. Crystal chandeliers blazed with hundreds of candles, their light multiplied by strategically placed mirrors that created an impression of endless illumination. Garlands of summer roses and ivy adorned the columns and archways, their subtle perfume mingling with the more assertive fragrances of the assembled guests. From her position near one of the side entrances, Mira watched as the Duke led Lady Seren to the center of the room. The orchestra, situated on a raised dais at the far end, fell silent at a signal from the conductor. Into this expectant hush, the Duke spoke with the clear projection of one accustomed to command. "Friends and neighbors, I thank you for your presence this evening as Thornfield Hall renews a tradition too long neglected. It is my privilege to open this midsummer ball accompanied by Lady Seren Thellen, who makes her first formal appearance in society tonight." Polite applause followed this announcement. Lady Seren, visibly nervous yet determined, maintained perfect posture as other couples formed around them for the opening quadrille. At the conductor's signal, the orchestra began. Mira held her breath as Lady Seren executed her first steps, painfully aware that weeks of private practice might easily crumble under the weight of so many observing eyes. Yet the child moved with surprising confidence, a small face composed in an expression of serious concentration that gradually softened into quiet enjoyment. "She performs admirably," observed a voice beside Mira. "Your influence, I understand." Lord Pembroke had materialized at her elbow, his aristocratic features arranged in an expression of benign curiosity. Mira curtsied automatically, uncomfortable with his attention. "Lady Seren has natural grace, my lord. I merely provided elementary guidance." "Such modesty," he remarked, his gaze lingering longer than propriety strictly permitted. "The Duke speaks highly of your methods, though he remains characteristically reticent about details." Before Mira could formulate an appropriate response, movement on the dance floor recaptured her attention. The quadrille had reached a figure requiring partners to separate and rejoin. Lady Seren, momentarily confused by the pattern, hesitated visibly. For a heartbeat, panic flashed across her features, then her gaze found Mira across the room. Without conscious thought, Mira raised her hands slightly, mimicking the correct position. Lady Seren immediately understood, correcting her stance and continuing the dance without further hesitation. "Fascinating," murmured Lord Pembroke, who had observed this silent exchange. "The child appears utterly devoted to you. A circumstance the Duke views with complex emotions, I suspect." The implication in his tone caused heat to rise to Mira's cheeks. "My only concern is Lady Seren's well-being, my lord, as is her father's." "Of course," he agreed smoothly, "though well-being takes many forms, does it not? The emotional as well as the physical. The Duke himself appears transformed since my last visit, less the austere widower, more the man he was before tragedy struck." Mira maintained a diplomatic silence, though her gaze remained fixed on Lady Seren, who now moved through the dance with growing confidence. The Duke, too, seemed to have shed some portion of his habitual reserve, his movements more fluid than she had ever observed, his expression no longer rigidly controlled. "I wonder," Lord Pembroke continued in the same casual tone, "if Halewood fully appreciates the nature of the changes occurring within his household, or their potential consequences." Before Mira could decipher this cryptic observation, the quadrille concluded. Applause filled the ballroom as the Duke bowed formally to Lady Seren, who returned a perfect curtsy. "If you'll excuse me, my lord," Mira said, seizing the opportunity to escape his unsettling scrutiny. "I must attend Lady Seren." She made her way through the crowd, arriving at Lady Seren's side, just as Lady Montgomery joined them, her expression one of unabashed triumph. "Perfection," the Countess declared. "Every eye in the room upon you both, exactly as it should be." She turned to the Duke. "Alistair, you must allow Seren one more dance before she retires. The Talbots' youngest son would be a suitable partner, just there, with his mother." The Duke's gaze remained on his daughter, whose flushed cheeks and bright eyes spoke eloquently of excitement rather than fatigue. "Do you wish to continue for one more dance, Seren?" Lady Seren nodded eagerly, then looked to Mira with a question in her eyes. "I shall remain right here, my lady," Mira assured her, watching every step. As the Countess departed to arrange the promised dance, the Duke addressed Mira directly for the first time that evening. "She performs well. Your instruction has proven more valuable than anticipated." The grudging acknowledgement warmed Mira despite its reserved delivery. "Lady Seren has courage, your grace. The rest is merely practice." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes perhaps, or a slight relaxation of the stern mouth. "Do you attribute to her what many would claim as their own achievement?" "I merely observed what was already present," Mira replied simply, "as did you, when you permitted these sessions against your initial judgment." Their exchange was interrupted as Lady Montgomery returned with young Master Talbot, a boy of perhaps 10 years who bowed nervously to Lady Seren. The orchestra struck up the opening notes of a country dance, simpler than the quadrille and better suited to younger participants. As Lady Seren took her place in the forming set, the Duke remained beside Mira, an unusual breach of the social distance typically maintained between them in public. "Lord Pembroke seems to have developed an interest in you," he observed, his tone neutral, yet somehow charged with unspoken meaning. Mira kept her gaze fixed upon Lady Seren, unwilling to meet his eyes during such a conversation. "His lordship was merely being polite, I'm sure." Pembroke's politeness is invariably calculated, Miss Elowen. I advise caution in any further interactions. The warning, for such it clearly was, hung between them, its implications too complex to be unravelled in their current setting. Before Mira could formulate a response, Lady Montgomery rejoined them, her social radar evidently having detected this unusual tête-à-tête. "Alistair, Lady Houghton is positively desperate for an introduction," she interjected smoothly. "Her daughter has just returned from finishing school in Paris and is said to play the pianoforte divinely." The Duke acknowledged this information with a slight inclination of his head, though his attention remained on Lady Serene, now moving happily through the simpler figures of the country dance. "Miss Elowen will escort Serene to her chambers after this dance concludes," he stated, the instruction clearly intended for both women. "She has performed admirably for her first social appearance, but I will not risk overtaxing her constitution." With that, he allowed Lady Montgomery to lead him toward the waiting Lady Houghton, though not before casting a final glance at Mira that contained some message she could not decipher. Left alone to watch over her charge, Mira found her thoughts in turmoil. The evening had confirmed both Lady Serene's progress and the precarious nature of Mira's own position within the complex social ecosystem of Thornfield Hall. As Lady Serene gradually re-entered the world appropriate to her birth, the bond between them, forged in silence and nurtured through dance, would necessarily alter. Yet watching the child's face now, alight with the simple joy of movement and music, Mira could not bring herself to regret any step of their shared journey, whatever price might eventually come due. Autumn descended upon Thornfield with gentle persistence, painting the extensive grounds in shades of amber and russet. Leaves drifted from ancient oaks, creating a golden carpet across the formal gardens, where Lady Serene now spent many of her afternoons. The midsummer ball had marked a turning point in the child's re-emergence into society, a cautious first step that had yielded results beyond all expectations. In the 3 months since that pivotal evening, Lady Serene had begun accompanying her father to selected social engagements. Though she remained silent, her increased animation and willingness to engage through gesture and expression had transformed how the neighboring families perceived her. No longer the tragic, withdrawn figure of whispered speculation, she had become simply Lady Serene, a quiet but observant child with a particular affinity for dance. "The Michaelmas dinner at Harrington Court is this coming Friday," Mrs. Winters announced, as she supervised Lady Serene's morning lessons. "His Grace has indicated that you will attend, Lady Serene, along with Miss Elowen as your companion." The child looked up from her arithmetic with evident pleasure at this news. Her gaze sought Mira, who stood by the window arranging autumn flowers in a crystal vase, a small smile passing between them in silent communication. "You will need to review your dance steps before then," Mrs. Winters continued, her tone suggesting this was a duty rather than a pleasure. "I understand there is to be an informal musical evening following dinner, with opportunities for the younger guests to perform." Lady Serene's expression dimmed slightly at this information. Despite her progress in movement, the prospect of performing before an audience beyond Thornfield still caused visible anxiety. "Perhaps," Mira suggested gently, "we might practice in the music room this afternoon. Lady Serene has been making excellent progress with the minuet." The governess nodded briskly. "His Grace has approved an hour for such practice daily until the engagement. He is most insistent that Lady Serene acquit herself with distinction." This emphasis on the Duke's expectations sent a ripple of concern through Mira. In recent weeks, His Grace had displayed increasing pride in his daughter's social development, yet sometimes seemed to forget the fragility that still underlay her newfound confidence. The prospect of a formal performance, however modest, might prove overwhelming if handled without sensitivity. That afternoon found them in the music room, now fully restored to its former glory. Dust covers had been permanently removed, the pianoforte tuned to perfection, and fresh flowers appeared weekly in crystal vases. Lady Serene stood in the center of the room, her face a study in concentration as Mira demonstrated the opening steps of the minuet. "Remember, my lady, the minuet tells a story," Mira explained, executing a graceful turn. "Each movement conveys respect, dignity, and ultimately joy." Lady Serene followed the steps with careful precision, her natural grace increasingly evident as confidence replaced uncertainty. When she completed the figure without error, Mira applauded softly. "Excellent. Your mother would be so proud of your accomplishments." At the mention of the Duchess, now a regular part of their conversations, Lady Serenne's expression brightened further. She pointed to the portrait miniature that had recently been placed upon the pianoforte, a small oval painting showing the late Duchess in her court presentation gown, her smile as luminous in art as it had reportedly been in life. "Yes, she does appear happy there, doesn't she?" Mira agreed, recognizing the question in the gesture. "Lady Montgomery tells me she danced the minuet at court and received a personal compliment from the Queen." The door opened as she spoke, admitting the Duke himself, an increasingly common occurrence during these practice sessions. His tall figure filled the doorway momentarily before he stepped into the room with measured grace. "Your mother outshone every debutante presented that season," he confirmed, addressing his daughter directly, not through elaborate technique, but through the joy she brought to every movement. Lady Serene approached him without hesitation, taking his hand with the easy familiarity that had developed between them over recent months. The Duke's expression softened as he looked down at her, the stern lines of his face relaxing into something that, if not quite a smile, conveyed genuine warmth. "Show me what you have learned today," he requested, releasing her hand to take a seat near the window. Mira moved to the pianoforte, where she could provide the simple accompaniment required for practice. As her fingers found the opening notes, Lady Serene assumed the first position, her small face composed in an expression of serene concentration. The minuet unfolded with stately elegance, the child moving through its formal patterns with surprising assurance. When she executed a particularly challenging turn without faltering, the Duke nodded approval, a gesture that brought visible pleasure to his daughter's face. "She has a natural aptitude," he observed to Mira as the piece concluded. "Though I confess some concern about her performance at Harrington Court, the Ashtons will be present, and their eldest daughter is known for her critical nature." Mira closed the pianoforte carefully. "Lady Serene's progress speaks for itself, Your Grace. Those who witness her performance with unbiased eyes will see only beauty and courage." The Duke's gaze lingered on his daughter, who had moved to examine a portfolio of musical scores with evident interest. "You believe she is ready for such scrutiny?" "I believe," Mira replied carefully, "that protecting her from challenge serves her less well than supporting her through it. Lady Serene has demonstrated remarkable resilience these past months." A shadow crossed the Duke's features, there and gone so quickly that Mira might have imagined it. "I have been accused, not without cause, of excessive caution where my daughter is concerned." "Caution born of love, Your Grace," Mira offered quietly. "No one who observes you with Lady Serene could doubt your devotion to her well-being." The unexpected softness of this observation seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment his customary reserve faltered, revealing a vulnerability that sent an unexpected warmth through Mira's chest. "You have a talent, Miss Elowen," he said after a measured pause, "for perceiving what others might overlook. It is a quality I have come to value." The admission hung between them, weighted with implications neither dared acknowledge directly. Before Mira could formulate a response that would not transgress the boundaries of propriety, Lady Serene returned to them, carrying the portfolio she had been examining. She opened it to reveal sheet music for a complex waltz, pointing first to the notes and then to her father with questioning eyes. "You wish me to dance this with you?" the Duke interpreted, surprise evident in his tone. "The Vienna waltz is rather advanced for your current studies, Serene." The child's expression remained resolute, her determination clear despite her silence. She extended her small hand toward her father, the gesture unmistakably an invitation. After a moment's hesitation, the Duke rose. "Very well. Miss Elowen, are you familiar with this piece?" "Yes, Your Grace," Mira confirmed, returning to the pianoforte. "Though I must warn you, my playing does not approach the standard you might be accustomed to." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a rare expression that transformed his stern features. "I suspect we shall all be making accommodations for one another's limitations this afternoon." As Mira began to play, father and daughter moved into the opening position of the waltz. The Duke adjusted his steps to match his daughter's smaller stride, creating a modified version of the dance that honored its essential character while accommodating her capabilities. Watching them from the pianoforte, Mira felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. The tableau before her, stern, grief-stricken Duke and silent, lonely child, transformed through shared movement into figures of genuine harmony, spoke more eloquently than words ever could of healing's gradual progress. Yet even as she celebrated this transformation, a shadow of melancholy touched her heart. With each step Lady Seren took toward her rightful place in society, the bond between them would necessarily alter. The child would eventually outgrow her need for the companion who had first coaxed her from silence, as was proper and inevitable. And the Duke? The thought remained unfinished, too dangerous to contemplate even in the privacy of her own mind. The waltz concluded with a flourish, Lady Seren executing a perfect curtsy as her father bowed formally before her. To Mira's astonishment, the child then turned toward her and repeated the gesture, a silent acknowledgement of gratitude that brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Well done, Lady Seren," she said, blinking rapidly to dispel the unwelcome moisture. "You shall outshine everyone at Harrington Court, I have no doubt." The Duke studied his daughter with evident pride, then turned his attention to Mira. "You have worked wonders, Miss Elowen. I find myself increasingly in your debt." "I have merely guided what was already present, Your Grace," Mira demurred, uncomfortable with praise that felt simultaneously excessive and insufficient to describe the complex relationship that had developed between herself and her charge. "Nevertheless," he insisted, "your contribution to Seren's progress cannot be overstated. I should like to speak with you further on this matter. Perhaps you might attend me in the library after dinner this evening? Lady Montgomery will sit with Seren." The formal request, delivered with careful neutrality, nevertheless sent an inexplicable flutter of apprehension through Mira's chest. "Of course, Your Grace. At what hour would be most convenient?" 9 o'clock, he replied, his expression revealing nothing of his intentions. "We have much to discuss regarding future arrangements." Future arrangements. The phrase hung in the air between them, laden with possibilities both promising and disturbing. As the Duke departed with his daughter, Mira remained seated at the pianoforte, her fingers resting lightly on the silent keys. What future could possibly exist within the rigid constraints of their respective positions, and why did the prospect of discovering the Duke's intentions fill her with such conflicting emotions of hope and dread? The library at Thornfield Hall had always impressed Mira with its solemn grandeur. Walls lined with leather-bound volumes reaching toward a coffered ceiling, massive oak desk positioned to capture optimal light from tall windows, and in winter, a fire perpetually maintained in the carved marble fireplace. Tonight that fire cast dancing shadows across the room, softening its austere lines and creating an atmosphere of unexpected intimacy. Mira entered precisely at 9 o'clock, her appearance betraying none of the nervous anticipation that had accompanied her preparation for this meeting. She had changed from her day dress into her best evening attire, a gown of deep blue wool, simple in cut, but flattering to her slender figure. A small cameo, her mother's sole legacy, adorned her throat while her hair remained in its customary modest arrangement. The Duke stood before the fireplace, his tall figure silhouetted against the flames. At her entrance he turned, revealing an expression that gave no hint of his thoughts. "Miss Elowen, punctual as always," he observed, gesturing toward a chair positioned near his own. "Please, be seated." The invitation to sit in his presence rather than stand as protocol, dictated for a servant receiving instructions, marked this meeting as unusual from the outset. Mira complied, perching on the edge of the chair with hands folded carefully in her lap. "I trust Lady Seren has retired for the evening?" she inquired, seeking safe ground for the conversation's beginning. "Indeed. Lady Montgomery is reading to her, some fanciful tale of knights and princesses that Seren appears to find captivating." A suggestion of amusement softened his features momentarily. "My cousin insists that imagination requires nurturing as much as intellect." "A wise perspective, Your Grace," Mira agreed. "Lady Seren's artistic talents certainly suggest a lively inner world." The Duke nodded, studying her with that penetrating gaze that always made Mira feel transparent, as though her every thought lay exposed to his scrutiny. "You have served this household with distinction these past months, Miss Elowen," he began, his tone formal yet not cold. "Your influence on my daughter's development has exceeded all reasonable expectations." "Lady Seren required only understanding, Your Grace," Mira replied, uncomfortable with praise that felt unearned. "The courage and determination were entirely her own. And yet," he countered, "it was you who first perceived those qualities when others, myself included, saw only brokenness and limitation." He paused, his gaze dropping momentarily to the flames. "You have given my daughter back to me, Miss Elowen, a debt not easily discharged." The raw honesty of this declaration left Mira momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it emerged softer than intended. "There is no debt, Your Grace." Lady Seren's welfare has been reward enough for any service I might have rendered. The Duke rose abruptly, moving to the massive desk where a decanter and glasses had been arranged. May I offer you some sherry? The offer, another departure from the protocols governing interactions between master and servant, indicated the unusual nature of this conversation. Mira inclined her head in acceptance, watching as he poured two modest measures with the precise movements that characterized his every action. When he returned, offering her the crystal glass, their fingers brushed momentarily. The brief contact sent an inexplicable warmth through Mira's frame, causing her to withdraw her hand perhaps more quickly than grace required. "Forgive me," the Duke said, misinterpreting her reaction. "I forget myself. Such familiarity is inappropriate." "No, Your Grace," Mira hastened to clarify. "I was merely startled. Your courtesy is most appreciated." He resumed his seat, studying her over the rim of his glass with an intensity that caused her to lower her gaze. "I have received a letter from Lord Pembroke," he stated abruptly, the apparent non sequitur catching Mira by surprise. "Indeed, Your Grace?" she responded cautiously, unsure of the relevance of this information to their meeting. "He has requested permission to address certain inquiries to you directly." The Duke's voice remained neutral, though something in his posture suggested tension. "Inquiries of a personal nature." Understanding dawned with discomforting clarity. Lord Pembroke's interest during the midsummer ball had not been merely casual observation, but something more deliberate. "I see," Mira said, her voice carefully controlled. "His lordship does me great honor, though I confess some surprise at his attention." "Do you?" The Duke's question carried an edge she could not interpret. Pembroke is not known for impulsive decisions. His interest, while unexpected given the discrepancy in your stations, is not entirely incomprehensible. The faint praise delivered with such clinical detachment stung in ways Mira had not anticipated. "Your Grace is most generous in his assessment." "You misunderstand me," the Duke said quickly, leaning forward. "I merely observe that Pembroke, despite his many shortcomings, possesses sufficient discernment to recognize exceptional qualities when they present themselves." The clarification hung in the air between them, its implications too complex to be unraveled in the moment. Mira sipped her sherry, grateful for the moment's reprieve from direct conversation. "I have not yet responded to his request," the Duke continued after a pause. "I wish to ascertain your feelings on the matter before doing so." The consideration inherent in this statement, that her wishes might influence his response to a peer of the realm, struck Mira as extraordinary. "I am uncertain how to answer, Your Grace. Lord Pembroke is hardly known to me, yet his interest appears genuine." The Duke set his glass aside, his expression inscrutable. "An alliance with a man of his position would represent a significant advancement for someone of your background." The pragmatic assessment, though undeniably accurate, carried a coolness that caused Mira's heart to contract painfully. "Is Your Grace suggesting I should welcome such attention?" "I am suggesting," he replied carefully, "that practical considerations must sometimes outweigh personal inclinations. Pembroke offers security and position that your current circumstances cannot provide." "And Lady Seren?" Mira asked, the question emerging before prudence could intervene. "What of her needs should I depart Thornfield?" The Duke's expression tightened momentarily. "My daughter's welfare remains my primary concern. However, her progress these past months has been remarkable. She may soon be ready for a governess of more conventional background." Each word fell like a stone upon Mira's heart, though she maintained outward composure with effort born of necessity. "I see. You believe my usefulness to Lady Seren approaches its conclusion. I believe," he corrected with unexpected gentleness, "that you deserve consideration of your own future beyond the walls of Thornfield." The statement, delivered with what appeared to be genuine concern for her welfare, nevertheless carried the unmistakable message that her time within this household, this makeshift family she had come to cherish, had finite boundaries. Mira rose, needing physical movement to counteract the sudden constriction in her chest. She moved to the window, gazing out at the darkness beyond the glass. "Your Grace is most considerate of my circumstances," she said finally. "Though I confess Lord Pembroke's interest, while flattering, holds little appeal for me personally." A silence followed this admission, not uncomfortable but weighted with unspoken possibilities. When the Duke finally spoke, his voice carried a quality she had never before heard from him: uncertainty. "May I ask why his attention fails to gratify? Many would consider it a most advantageous situation." Mira turned from the window to find him watching her with an expression that caused her heart to quicken inexplicably. "I have found, Your Grace, that advantage without affection makes for a poor bargain in matters of the heart." The candor of her response seemed to startle him. For a moment, the carefully maintained distance between duke and servant wavered, replaced by the simpler reality of man and woman engaged in conversation of increasing intimacy. "And have you discovered affection elsewhere that would render Pembroke's suit unwelcome?" The question, delivered with careful neutrality, nevertheless carried implications that sent a flush of heat to Mira's cheeks. "My attachments at Thornfield are not of a nature that could reasonably influence such decisions," she replied with equal care. "Lady Serene holds my deepest affection, but our connection, however meaningful, must necessarily evolve as she matures." "And beyond my daughter?" the Duke pressed, rising to stand before her. "Are there no other considerations that might influence your decision?" The directness of the question, coupled with his physical proximity, momentarily robbed Mira of composure. She lowered her gaze, conscious suddenly of the vast gulf separating their stations, a gulf no amount of shared experience could truly bridge. "It would be most improper, Your Grace," she said finally, "to acknowledge attachments that can lead nowhere appropriate." The admission, veiled though it was, hung in the air between them like a tangible presence. The Duke stepped closer, close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of sandalwood that always accompanied him. "Improper," he repeated softly. "Yes, that would indeed be the world's judgment." Before Mira could respond, a sharp knock at the library door shattered the moment. The Duke stepped back immediately, his expression closing like a book snapped shut by an impatient hand. "Enter," he called, his voice restored to its customary authority. Mrs. Harren appeared, her face betraying momentary surprise at finding Mira present. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace. Lady Serene appears distressed. The Countess suggested Miss Elowen might be required." "Of course," the Duke replied, his manner entirely proper once more. "Miss Elowen, pray attend my daughter immediately. We shall continue our discussion regarding Lord Pembroke's inquiry at a more suitable time." The dismissal, though couched in consideration for Lady Serene's needs, carried finality that could not be mistaken. Mira curtsied formally, her composure firmly restored despite the tumult of emotions beneath the surface. "As Your Grace wishes. Good evening." As she followed Mrs. Harren from the library, Mira felt the weight of the Duke's gaze upon her retreating figure, a sensation both discomforting and somehow essential, like pressure against a wound one knows must eventually heal. Whatever had nearly transpired in that fire-lit room, whatever truths had hovered unspoken between them, reality had reasserted itself with the housekeeper's timely interruption. The Duke of Halewood stood on one side of an unbridgeable chasm, Myra Elowen on the other. That some part of her soul had already leapt across that divide was a truth she dared not examine too closely, even in the privacy of her own heart. The gardens of Thornfield Hall lay blanketed in the first snowfall of winter, their formal patterns transformed into a landscape of pristine white. From the nursery window, Mira watched Lady Serene tracing patterns in the frost that decorated the glass, her small finger creating elaborate whirls, reminiscent of those carved into her mother's spinning top. In the month since the illuminating conversation in the library, Mira had observed a subtle shift in the household's atmosphere, a tension beneath the surface that remained unacknowledged, yet palpably present. Lord Pembroke's interest had been politely but firmly discouraged, though not by any action on Mira's part. The Duke had apparently responded to his peer's inquiry without further consultation, a circumstance that left Mira suspended in uncertain limbo regarding her position and future. "Miss Elowen," Lady Serene's governess called from the doorway, "His Grace requests your presence in the blue drawing-room immediately. I shall remain with Lady Serene until your return." Mira nodded acknowledgement, smoothing her skirts with suddenly unsteady hands. "Of course, Lady Serene, I shall return shortly." The child turned from her frost drawings, fixing Mira with that penetrating gaze that always seemed to perceive far more than her years should permit. She nodded once solemnly, as though offering reassurance rather than seeking it. The journey to the blue drawing-room seemed simultaneously interminable and far too brief. Mira's thoughts raced with possibilities, none entirely satisfactory. Perhaps the Duke had reconsidered Lord Pembroke's suit after all. Perhaps he had engaged a new companion for Lady Serene, rendering Mira's position redundant. Perhaps— She paused outside the drawing-room door, gathering composure before knocking softly. "Enter," came the Duke's voice, its tone revealing nothing of his mood or intentions. Mira stepped into the room to find not only the Duke, but also Lady Montgomery seated near the window. The Countess's presence suggested a formal occasion of some significance, causing Mira's apprehension to increase tenfold. "Miss Elowen," the Duke greeted her, his expression carefully neutral. "Thank you for attending so promptly." "Your Grace, Lady Montgomery." Mira curtsied to each in turn, maintaining the perfect decorum expected of her position, despite the anxiety coursing through her veins. "Please, be seated," the Countess invited, gesturing to a chair positioned opposite them. "What we have to discuss requires some deliberation." This unusual courtesy, coupled with the formality of the setting, confirmed Mira's suspicion that significant changes approached. She sat as directed, hands folded in her lap to disguise their slight trembling. "Miss Elowen," the Duke began without preamble, "I have been giving considerable thought to my daughter's education and future development. Her progress these past months has been nothing short of remarkable, owing in no small part to your influence." "Lady Seren's courage deserves all credit, Your Grace," Mira responded automatically, the familiar deflection offering momentary refuge from uncertainty. A ghost of a smile touched the Duke's lips. "Your modesty, while commendable, does not alter facts. My daughter has flourished under your guidance in ways no one, myself least of all, anticipated." Lady Montgomery leaned forward slightly. "What my cousin means to convey, Miss Elowen, is that Seren's continued advancement requires careful consideration of all factors contributing to her well-being." The measured phrasing suggested a diplomatic delivery of unwelcome news. Mira steeled herself for the inevitable conclusion. Her services, having fulfilled their temporary purpose, would now be politely but firmly dispensed with. "I understand," she said quietly. "Lady Seren's needs must naturally take precedence over all other considerations." "Precisely so," the Duke agreed, his gaze holding hers with unexpected intensity, "which is why I have determined that maintaining the bond between you and my daughter serves her best interests moving forward." The statement, so contrary to her expectations, momentarily robbed Mira of speech. She looked between the Duke and Countess, seeking clarification. "I don't understand, Your Grace. I had thought, that is, our previous conversation suggested that I considered your usefulness to Seren approaching its conclusion." The Duke completed her thought with surprising gentleness. "A deliberate misdirection, I confess. I needed to ascertain certain truths before proceeding with the proposal I now lay before you." Lady Montgomery nodded encouragement. "Do continue, Alistair. Miss Elowen's confusion only increases with delay." The Duke rose, moving to stand before the fireplace in a posture that suggested contained energy rather than his customary stillness. "I find myself, Miss Elowen, in the unusual position of owing my daughter's salvation to a woman of no particular birth or fortune, yet possessed of qualities I have come to value beyond all conventional considerations." He turned to face her directly, his expression more open than she had ever witnessed. "In short, I find that Thornfield cannot function properly without your presence, nor, I suspect, can its master." The implication in these words sent a flush of heat to Mira's cheeks. "Your Grace, Allow me to be explicit," he interrupted, his voice gaining confidence with each word. "I am proposing, Miss Elowen, not continuation of your employment, but elevation to a position where your influence on my daughter may continue unimpeded by the constraints of your current station." Understanding dawned slowly, then with blinding clarity. "You cannot mean marriage, Miss Elowen," the Duke confirmed, the word falling into the room like a stone into still water. "I am proposing matrimony between us." Lady Montgomery's expression suggested barely suppressed satisfaction as she observed Mira's stunned reaction. "Before you respond, my dear, understand that this proposal comes after considerable deliberation. The conventional path would certainly be less complicated. Society will question such a match," the Duke acknowledged frankly. "My peers will whisper of mésalliance and inappropriate elevation. None of this concerns me in the slightest, provided you are prepared to weather such storms at my side." Mira rose unsteadily, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. "Your Grace, while I am honored beyond expression by your proposal, I must ask, is this arrangement primarily for Lady Seren's benefit? For if so, I fear it may eventually breed resentment where now there is only—" She broke off, unable to complete the thought aloud. The Duke crossed the room in 3 swift strides, stopping before her with uncharacteristic uncertainty visible in his expression. "What I feel for you, Miss Elowen, Mira, began with gratitude, I cannot deny. Yet it has evolved into something far more essential. I find myself unwilling to contemplate a future where I cannot turn and find you at hand, challenging my assumptions and illuminating perspectives I would otherwise overlook." He hesitated, then with deliberate intent took her hand in his. "In simpler terms, I have developed an attachment that transcends considerations of station or propriety. An attachment I believe, I hope, might not be entirely unwelcome to you." The touch of his hand around hers, warm and unexpectedly gentle, sent cascades of sensation through Mira's frame. She looked up to meet his gaze directly, finding in those grey eyes a vulnerability that mirrored her own. "It is not unwelcome," she admitted softly. "Indeed, it has become rather essential to my own happiness, though I never permitted myself to acknowledge such an impossible hope." Lady Montgomery cleared her throat discreetly. "I believe my presence is no longer required for this discussion. Alistair, Miss Elowen, I shall look in on Seren and inform her that you will both attend her shortly, with news that I suspect will bring her considerable joy." As the Countess departed, closing the door with deliberate softness behind her, silence descended upon the drawing-room. Mira remained conscious of the Duke's hand still holding hers, a physical connection that seemed to embody the emotional bridge they had constructed between their disparate worlds. "I must ask directly," the Duke said after a moment, his voice low and intent. "Will you consent to become my wife, Mira Elowen? To stand as Duchess of Halewood and mother to my child? To face whatever storms society might conjure with the same courage you have demonstrated these past months?" Mira drew a steadying breath, allowing herself to fully acknowledge the truth she had kept carefully guarded within her heart. "I will, Your Grace, Alistair, though I bring nothing to this union save myself and whatever qualities you find worthy of such extraordinary elevation." "You bring everything essential," he corrected gently. "Compassion where there was coldness, light where shadow had prevailed, the courage to reach across silence when all others had abandoned hope." With careful deliberation, he raised her hand to his lips, placing a kiss upon her knuckles that sealed their understanding more effectively than any formal declaration. "We shall tell Seren together," he said, his voice warming with anticipation of his daughter's reaction, "though I suspect she has long understood what we ourselves were slow to recognize." "That her drawing?" Mira recalled suddenly, the three figures holding hands before Thornfield. She knew, even then. The Duke smiled, a full, unguarded expression that transformed his features from handsome severity to something approaching joy. "My daughter has always seen clearly, even in her silence. She recognized your heart, when mine was still too wounded to perceive its equal." As they moved toward the door, hands still joined in tangible affirmation of their new understanding, Mira felt the future unfold before her, like the snow-covered gardens beyond the window, pristine, filled with possibility, and illuminated by the light of love, rekindled through a child's silent wisdom. "Come dance with me," she whispered, echoing the words that had first breached the walls of solitude around both father and daughter. "Not just for an evening, but for all the days to come." "For all my days," the Duke promised, his voice carrying the solemnity of a sacred vow, "until the last measure of our music fades." Together, they ascended the stairs toward the nursery, where Lady Seren awaited, the silent child whose wordless invitation to dance had orchestrated a symphony of healing. None could have foreseen on that fateful evening when a young maid dared extend her hand to a duke's forgotten child. In the silence between spoken words often lies the deepest language of the heart. The young maid saw the duke's child, left alone, until she whispered, "Come, dance with me," reminds us that true nobility resides not in titles or lineage, but in the courage to extend our hand across the chasms that divide us. When Mira knelt before a forgotten child and offered not commands but invitation, she demonstrated that healing begins with seeing others not as they appear, but as they truly are. The most profound transformations often start with the smallest gestures of compassion. Just as the simple invitation to dance awakened Lady Seren from her silent isolation, our own acts of authentic connection can rekindle hope in those who have retreated behind walls of grief. The story teaches us that sometimes the most powerful thing we can offer another soul is not our wisdom or our strength, but our willingness to meet them exactly where they stand, and from that place begin a new journey together. Perhaps most importantly, this tale reminds us that love transcends the artificial boundaries we construct between ourselves. The dance of life invites us all, regardless of station, background, or circumstance, to join in its eternal rhythm. When we accept this invitation with an open heart, we discover that the distinctions we once thought immutable fade away, revealing the simple truth that in our shared humanity lies our greatest nobility. Did this story of silent healing and unexpected love touch your heart? We'd love to hear which moment resonated most deeply with you. Perhaps it was Mira's gentle invitation to dance, the Duke's first tentative steps toward healing, or Lady Seren's wordless wisdom that orchestrated their journey toward family. Subscribe to our channel for more exquisitely crafted Victorian romances that celebrate the transformative power of love across all boundaries. Your subscription ensures you'll never miss our weekly tales of courage, redemption, and hearts finding their perfect rhythm together. Leave a comment sharing your favorite scene or character. Was it Mira's compassionate bravery, the Duke's journey from grief to love, or Lady Seren's silent strength that captured your imagination? Your thoughts inspire our storytelling and connect us all in the beautiful dance of shared emotions. Thank you for joining us for another journey into the heart of the Victorian era. From all of us at Victorian Romance Audio Stories, we're grateful for your continued support and look forward to waltzing through many more tales of timeless love together.